Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Navis Nobilite. I am Captain Zelnick, and today, as you can see, we're doing something a little bit different. You see, recently Games Workshop decided to take its own lore and throw it as violently into the trash as it possibly can with the recent reveal of the Terminus Decree. Now, this little piece of lore has been kind of sitting around, rattling through the heads of the fans trying to figure out what could it possibly mean, with plenty of insinuation and implication and consequences that can come with such an incredible decree. For those who didn't know, the original Terminus Decree was a mystery. It was a box with a symbol that only was matched by the Golden Throne itself, that only the chapter master of the Grey Knights knew that the box existed. Didn't know what was inside of it. Now, some thought it was the anti-marine phage. Some thought it was a tool designed to turn off the Golden Throne and release the spirit of the Emperor. And mystery in 40K is a very important thing for all of its fans and all of the people who enjoy it, because that's what lets people speculate. It can also provide opportunity for people to justify battling against allied forces, like maybe the Custodes feel that the Grey Knights are not worthy of having such an important thing, despite that it was given to them supposedly by either Malcador the Sigillite or the Emperor themselves. But, the Custodes really don't care about this stuff, so, they may just be like, we need to take this box, and suddenly you have a narrative for why Custodes and Grey Knights are fighting. But in the most recent codex, Games Workshop decided to go and answer the question for us and tell us exactly what it is. And there is absolutely nobody with two brain cells to rub together who thinks this is a good idea. There are, for some reason, still Grey Knights fanboys, the truest Matt Wardian fanboys out there, that genuinely believe that they could actually pull this off, and that it is actually a cool piece of lore. Now, I am going to be discussing this lore from a Battlefleet Gothic perspective, and we're going to talk about the things that the Grey Knights are going to need to do in order to get to Terra, get to the throne room, and accomplish their goal of putting an ascended emperor back on the Golden Throne. And from a BFG perspective, there's a lot that we need to go through, but because we all recognize that it's going to require some very creative writing to have them get there, I have added this handy little counter. Image is thanks to Brava Alvabusa and the long-dead Emperor Had a Text-to-Speech device, but I find that it's appropriate. It is called the Caldor Draigo counter. It is how many times are we expected to suspend our disbelief by the neck until dead that they would accomplish certain tasks. Because even in 40K, there is a consistency within the lore. Things that are expected of certain elements of the lore to work within a certain manner and a certain way in order for the universe to actually function as a background. So every time we have to ignore the background or just wave our hands and say it is what it is, we are going to mark down a Caldor Draigo. That is right. We have to assume that Caldor Draigo is coming in and making sure that a certain incredibly unlikely circumstance comes to pass. So first, we need to appropriately set the stage. And for that, we need to understand the Sol system. Now, this image is technically from the end of the Horus Heresy. It's relatively accurate. The only major difference in this map is that it shows the last known location of Titan, because it was dragged into the warp by Malcador the Sigillite as a fortress in the warp, and the Grey Knights were kept away hundreds of years for them to practice and train and do all that wacky stuff. And eventually it did come back into the Materium, but they never actually tell us where. All we know is that it's relatively close to Mars, so we should assume it may be somewhere in the asteroid belt. We really don't know. Regardless, it is close to Mars. That's all we really know. Now, here we have to talk about laying the scene. There is no known moment when the Emperor himself will either ascend or the Golden Throne will break down. And we also have to talk about the forces that the Grey Knights have at their disposal. Now, the Grey Knight Space Marine chapter is a Space Marine chapter. They are not chapter, a Codex approved chapter, but we do know a few things. Namely, they may have reasonably, when it comes to their own forces, maybe about 10,000 fighting elements. Either that be Grey Knights themselves, which there are significantly less than 10,000. There are their neophytes. There are their battle automata. There are their vehicles. There are all of the elements that will make up their army. And 10,000 Grey Knights would make any other army go, we are fucked. Because it is the Grey Knights, it's them in full chapter force. Any other single army would have a very bad day, even if they outnumber them 10-1. The Grey Knights as a fleet, we don't exactly have accurate numbers. We do know that there are mentioned 3 individual Grey Knights battle barges. There are almost certainly more because of their proximity to Mars. So we're going to give them a charitable number of maybe 5 battle barges. And that for a Space Marine chapter is a lot. So we're going to go with 5. 3 of the known named ones and 2 unnamed ones. Okay? I think that's reasonable. If you know something I don't, please comment below. But I think that's a reasonable number. Now, strike cruisers. Strike cruisers are going to be more numerous, but again, we don't have exact numbers. I think we have between like 3, 5, or 8 known Grey Knight strike cruisers. I'm going to be charitable again and say they probably, because they are heavily space-based, let's say they have 12, 15, and at a most 20 strike cruisers. Now, that's a lot of strike cruisers for a Space Marine chapter. I think the average is between 10 and 12. And that, again, if I'm wrong, please comment below. This is all based upon my knowledge of 40K. And then they will have a large number of escort craft. We're talking your Gladiuses, your Novas, your Hunters. All of these very powerful, very fast, effective combat escorts that are capable of filling in the cracks of what is ostensibly a troop transport fleet. Now, Grey Knight ships are more advanced and more heavily focused on planetary assaults and exterminatus than your standard Space Marine strike cruiser, but they have all of the same operating capacities as a normal Space Marine strike cruiser. They have better drop pod landers and Thunderhawk bays, but that doesn't mean that they can launch any more. They're just more advanced, there's more automation, because they have the best technology that the AdMech are willing to give to a Space Marine chapter. So when it comes to their escorts, we're looking at maybe 2 full squadrons of each type. That's going to be 36 destroyers and frigates, which are more than capable of doing an enormous amount of damage. This is being charitable because they may have more, and I'm willing to go more. Maybe they have 3 squads of each. Maybe they have 4. They have really ready access to Mars. These are very effective strike craft. So they're going to have lots of them, or at the very least, they're going to have enough to properly escort their strike cruisers and battle barges into combat, or when they're moving from one side of the galaxy to another. And then we run into the most important element of the lore that is going to be the first major impedance. The Grey Knights are busy. They are not like the Imperial Fists, who tend to sit at Terra and be Terra's nominal defenders. They are on the move constantly, and they are spread supremely thin throughout the galaxy, because the Grey Knights have a specific job. They are the Ordo Malleus. They are meant to go and find demons and destroy them, destroy major demonic incursions. One squad of Grey Knights is a big deal, and each Space Marine strike cruiser nominally carries maybe a squad. It's not a lot of Space Marines on these ships. The only time where they have more is when they have a serious problem and have to bring multiple strike cruisers, or they have to bring the battle barges in to get involved. And these are major problems that have to be dealt with in the galaxy. The Grey Knights are not going to be in Sol when the event happens. They're going to be spread across the galaxy. They will be heavily spread across the galaxy. And that therein lies the first major hurdle of this Terminus Decree, which is the majority of Grey Knights are not in Sol. The Astronomicon goes out, and the Emperor ascends. Well, what do we have that can get to Terra quickly? Because if we don't get to Terra quickly, we're not going to be able to put him back on the throne because all of his armies are going to rally around him. They're not going to have really much of anything. They may have a bunch of neophytes. They may have, of course, a bunch of servitors used for combat, and maybe a small handful of Grey Knights actually on Titan. They're going to be the best because they're meant to defend Titan itself, but the numbers simply won't be much. So we have to actually make our very first Caldor Draigo usage of the story, which is there has to be a reason for all of the Grey Knights to be in the Sol system. So we are going to make our first major assumption here. It is the Great Millennial Grey Knight Ice Cream Social on Enceladus. All the Grey Knights across the galaxy have come to Sol because finally they get to have their ice cream social with Caldor Draigo, hence the use of Caldor Draigo. And because of that, the entirety of the Grey Knights fleet will be present in the Sol system. Now, for whatever reason, that an entire chapter's worth of forces are in one star system, specifically the Sol system, it is going to be noticed. Now, an important thing that the Grey Knights do not have is any form of stealth technology. The only stealth technology that really exists within the domain of 40k that has been referenced are the holofields of the Eldar, the stealth technology of the Necrons, and a single-use reference of a Tau custodian with a experimental stealth system that was destroyed in a very poorly written piece of lore. But the issue that I am bringing home here is that they will be noticed. The entirety of the Grey Knights chapter in one place at one time will be noticed by other elements within the Sol system, which we should get into. When it comes to the stellar defense of the Sol system, there is likely no other human world in the galaxy that is better defended than Sol. There is just unlikely to be anywhere close, because the Sol system is obviously the seat of imperial power of the Imperium. They are going to make sure that it is not bum rushed by orcs or chaos or any other fleet without suffering immensely. And if you hadn't noticed, within the realms of 40k, the majority of fleet incursions into the Sol system were very small, like the Necron escorts that landed on Mars. If there's any race that can be justified getting actually onto Mars before being obliterated, it's the Necrons, because they actually have effective stealth technology, and they are just so much faster than anything that the Imperials have. The Eldar cannot invade this sector. The Dark Eldar cannot invade Sol. The Harlequins got in because of bullshit webway nonsense. The chaos elements, like I believe it was Magnus the Red, managed to make it to the moon. Demons had an incursion inside there, but they never went in with fleet elements. They always had another way through. The Grey Knights do not have these methods. The best method that they would have to getting down onto the planet quickly to a place that nominally cannot be accessed would be teleportariums. Teleportariums have a very limited range. They would have to be within low Earth orbit to use a teleportarium effectively. And this is, of course, assuming a lot of things. And let's go into the next major assumption. We've already established the major assumption number one. The first Caldor Draigo is all the Grey Knights are in one place at one time, while the rest of the galaxy is burning because nobody's stopping the demonic incursions. But hey, it's the Ice Cream Social. It's the only one they get in 1,000 years. The galaxy can frickin' wait. Here's the next issue. The moment that the Astronomicon goes out and the Golden Throne shuts down and the Emperor walks off the throne, the warp itself is inaccessible. Even attempting to make a warp jump within a star system, which generally isn't done, there are a lot of problems with doing that. You know, opening a hole into the warp in a civilized area just doesn't seem like a smart thing to do. There's no way to get to Earth. There is no guiding light. The warp is completely inscrutable. Even a navigator is not particularly good at going from point A to point B. It is very, very difficult. The number of ships that will be lost would be catastrophic, especially if the Astronomicon goes out with things like the Cicatrix Maledictum going around. It's a bad time. Now, obviously, we have descriptions and moments in the lore before the Astronomicon was made that they were traveling. So we're going to say that any form of warp transit is dangerous. And thus, we are giving them the assumption that they're all in the Sol system. That's part of the reason why. Because if the Astronomicon goes out and the Grey Knights are spread through the galaxy, they're not getting to Terra, especially not in any kind of major force. They're going to get lost. The Grey Knights, as the ultimate enemies of demons, are not going to have the benefit of getting through the warp with any kind of accuracy or safety or any kind of speed. Tzeentch is probably going to grab their ships and throw them into the future or throw them into the past or throw them into a planet or do something. Because in that domain, they simply do not have the ability to go anywhere easily. So, first major assumption, all of the Grey Knights are in Terra when it goes out. Now, we have our next problem. How do the Grey Knights get their entire fleet from, presumably, Titan or their other holdings, which would be places like Enceladus or Deimos, which has been moved, but is now the manufactorum for the Grey Knights themselves. We're assuming that they are within the domain that they are expected to be in, because if they are not, they're going to have questions asked of them. And there we go into now the major authorities of space transit in the Sol system. Principally, Battlefleet Solar. Now, you get a teeny, tiny, infinitesimally small taste of the power of Battlefleet Solar. And Segmentum Solar, specifically, with the Armageddon sector. The Armageddon sector is so powerful, so rich, and so able to amount defenses that they have battle cruisers for days. That's right, one ship per battle cruiser is actually a pretty ridiculous number, but the Armageddon sector is designed to be a bastion of defense for the Sol system. So, the Battlefleet Solar, which is briefly referenced in the Battlefleet Gothic lexicon, as having battleship squadrons. That's right. Instead of having one cruiser per battle cruiser, it's you can just take battleships because it's the Sol system. It's the battleship squadrons of Battlefleet Solar are so ridiculously overpowered that we can't have them as rules in Battlefleet Gothic. There's no way to balance them. And they are the principal authority of what moves throughout the solar system. They are an enormous, overpowered, crazy fleet of individuals with one driving goal in mind: the defense of the Sol system. They have multiple rings of defense. They have multiple battleship squadrons. The number of cruisers and battle cruisers and light cruisers and escort craft is beyond counting. They're just an insane number of things. So they will notice when a chapter of Space Marines, it doesn't matter that they're the Grey Knights. Remember, the actual knowledge of what the Grey Knights are is a secret. Nobody really knows who the Grey Knights are. There's another chapter of Space Marines. They have slightly funny-looking ships. I mean, really funny-looking ships are like the Space Wolf ships where they keep putting wolf heads on things. So, sorry. So forgive me if they look only slightly funny. But Battlefleet Solar will notice this, and they will be asking questions like, why is the Space Marine fleet in system? Why are they here? Why are they in full force? And why do Grey Knights get to have an ice cream social and Battlefleet Solar doesn't? That would be really, a craw in my side personally. But moving on, we have Battlefleet Solar, which will 100% be monitoring this massive fleet, fully capable of obliterating any planet, because this is an element that really needs to be expressed to people who are not necessarily as aware of BFG lore. the Imperial Navy does not have the regard for Space Marines that your average Imperial Guardsmen do. They do not worship them as angels of death. They view them as a force that must be balanced. A Space Marine fleet is something that a naval fleet, an Imperial Navy fleet, will regard as a potential threat, because it is the duty of the Imperial Navy to prevent large-scale Imperial Space Marines from turning traitor, because the Imperial Navy is the major check and balance against the Space Marines as a faction. The Space Marines were denied warships at the end of the Horus Heresy, and it was given to normal mortal men as a means of preventing all of that crap from happening again. So, as a result, the segment of Solar would not just turn a blind eye. No, they would be watching it very, very carefully. The other factor that would be paying attention to this is Mars. Mars and the Questoris fleets are going to be taking a look at this and going, that's a mighty large number of Grey Knights in this system. Why? And something that all Grey Knights fans need to realize: Grey Knight Space Marines and all their neophytes and all of their temple slaves, they aren't the ones that run the ship. They are the help. The people who run Grey Knight ships are tech priests. Tech priests that do not have an oath of loyalty to the Grey Knights, they have an oath of loyalty to Mars. So rest assured, the Archmagos and the Grand Magos of Mars and, the High Lords is going to go, hey bro, what you doing? Why are all your ships here? Can you tell us what's going on? Come on, pretty please. And the Grey Knights will have no actual way of knowing if their tech priests are feeding information to Mars or to Terra. And I will tell you right now, they absolutely will, because remember where their loyalty actually lays: with Mars and the Fabricator General. Fabricator General has absolutely no interest in Grey Knights in that kind of force in his system next to Mars, because that's a threat to Mars. Now, is it much of a threat? Maybe. Mars is not a happy place to invade, but then again, it is the Fabricator General, as one of the High Lords of Terra, to defend Terra and to serve the Emperor. The Admech are ostensibly not an allied force of the Grey Knights, beyond the sense of they are parts of the Imperium of Man. Now, the other elements that are going to be going on in the system are the other elements of the Inquisition, who are going to be very confused as to why the relative balance of power in the Sol system has just been upended by an entire Odor Malleus fleet. There's going to be elements of the Ecclesiarchy that are going to be very concerned, because why are there so many Grey Knights in this place? Do we have a demonic infestation? Everyone's going to notice. There's no stealth here. Now, in the event that the Emperor ascends, or he walks off the throne, etc., 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 the Grey Knights need to get from where they are going to Earth. Because if there's no way for them to functionally land, if they just send Thunderhawks and Storm Ravens, those are going to be noticed and they're much easier to intercept. So the Grey Knights will almost certainly begin moving en masse towards Terra. There's really no other alternative. They're not going to really be able to scatter, because they need to maintain fleet coherency in order to get where they need to go with any kind of force projection power. So they'll begin, presumably, moving towards Terra. They need to be able to get close enough. Oh, there's one other force, that needs to be pointed out. The Imperial Fist Space Marine chapter, with the Phalanx, which is orbiting Earth. The Imperial Fists have about as much of an interest of letting another Space Marine chapter en masse on Earth as getting their gums extracted. Let's be honest, they're not really ones who give a damn if they're Grey Knights. They're not supposed to be here. It is the Imperial Fist's job to defend Earth. The Grey Knights can pound sand. So, the Grey Knights have to move towards Terra. This is going to be noticed. Why? You can't really hide in space. Everyone's going to see your fusion torches as the engines kick on. Are they going to go fast? They could try. I mean, if the Grey Knights gun their engines and just make a beeline for Earth, they could potentially outrun elements of Battlefleet Solar, like the outermost elements that are defending things around Jupiter, maybe certain elements that are close to Mars, or especially things around Uranus and Neptune and Pluto. Fine, you're going to be able to outrun those. However, you're not going to be able to outrun the things that you're approaching. Battlefleet Solar has rings of defense that are from the asteroid field in. So they're going to be encountering probably the most powerful elements of Battlefleet Solar. So making a mad dash for Earth ain't really going to cut it, because all you're going to do is expose that you're up to something. And no one in the solar system really trusts you to be up to good things if you're going in mass. Now, obviously, Grey Knights are considered to be a loyalist fleet. They are in a loyalist chapter, but making a mysterious mad dash for the heart of the Imperium is not going to be treated as a positive thing by any other factor. And Space Marines are not necessarily the most trusted, and the Grey Knights are even less trusted because nobody knows anything about them. I have to keep on reiterating this point. It is not normal for an entire chapter's strength to, for no reason at all, go all ahead full towards a planet, unless they're intending on crash landing on it or blowing it up. So the first thing that's going to be noticed is obviously Battlefleet Solar is going to be sending communications saying, hey, Grey Knight's fleet, you are moving towards Holy Terra. Please state your interests. Now, and this is where we need to ask the important question. What the hell are the Grey Knights going to say to Battlefleet Solar? They have no ability to say inquisitorial fiat. Well, there's a lot of other inquisitors in the Sol system. They're not really going to be able to overrule all of those other inquisitors that are going, I don't trust this. Not only that, Battlefleet Solar doesn't really have to say, okay, fine, go ahead. Remember, there are limitations to inquisitorial fiat, and Battlefleet Solar is commanded by the Lord High Admiral, who has higher authority than any inquisitor. The Lord High Admiral will probably say, no, state your interests in heading towards Terra. What are your intentions? Because you're bringing an entire battle fleet. And what would the Grey Knights say? There's nothing to be said. Well, maybe they want to go and have a pilgrimage. Why would you have a pilgrimage with all of your warships? Okay? Not exactly a peaceful display. Now, they could make the argument of, we are concerned about a potential demonic incursion, and that would probably be enough to at least give the Lord High Admiral pause, right? Maybe this is something serious. There's a lot of screaming and shouting about the Astronomicon. Maybe there is a demonic incursion, but wow, that's really convenient that the entire Grey Knights fleet were here when it happened. But still, let's assume, again, and this is actually a more reasonable assumption because they are a loyalist chapter, Battlefleet Solar will be convinced that they are up to no ill intent, okay? However, they are not simply going to allow the entirety of the Grey Knights fleet to simply unhindered go into Earth orbit. They will send an escorting fleet to escort them to Earth. Okay, this is just rationality. Now, I get it, rationality, 41st millennium, whatever. If there's any place where rationality exists in some moniker, it is the Sol system. Battlefleet Solar is going to send an escorting fleet, and this escorting fleet will retain a nominal firing distance between themselves and the Grey Knights fleet, because they know they have better range and effective weapons. They have Nova cannons, they have long-range lances, they have all sorts of stuff. It would be enough of a fleet which, even in the inner rungs of the solar system, could match and destroy the Grey Knights fleet. I really do mean that Battlefleet Solar has this power. Battlefleet Solar will also be bringing in fleet elements from Uranus and their more exterior defensive zones, mostly as backup. Now, those are going to take a long, long time to get there. They are not exactly the fastest ships. So they are merely there to shore up the rear. Now, on the other side, Adeptus Mechanicus is almost certainly, again, there's certainty that they are talking to the tech priests on the Grey Knight vessels. Now, there's really nothing that the Grey Knights can do to stop it. They don't have the technical acumen to prevent data tethers and other communication means. The tech priests are going to be asking, why is this fleet here and what are they doing on the vessel? Well, the tech priests, assuming that they are loyal to Mars, which is a safe assumption, will say, well, they're planning for battle. We have all of their military equipment. All of them are gathering their ammo. They're all doing their battle hymns. That's going to probably concern Mars a little bit because guess what? Holy Terra is still an important element for Mars. The Fabricator General would rationally then go, you know what? We're going to send some of our own ships to investigate and observe this grand assemblage of the machine god's most holy vessels. And they will probably send a Questoris fleet, which is present around Mars, to observe. I cannot stress to you that one of the biggest threats to the Grey Knight's fleet is the Adeptus Mechanicus and their fleet. They are the most advanced ships in humanity's hands. And there's even a really good shot that the Arch Mechanicus is there, or at the very least one of the many Arch Mechanicuses, maybe even the Omnissiah's Victory, otherwise known as the ship that punches the ever-living snot out of anything else in the galaxy, with like 2 exceptions. The Grey Knights would rapidly find themselves dramatically outgunned. Remember, we are talking about Grey Knight cruisers, AdMech cruisers, AdMech light cruisers, AdMech battleships. Every one of the cruisers and up are capable of fielding Nova cannons on their vessels. They also have exactly the same kinds of fast-moving escort craft, fully capable of intercepting and battling the Grey Knight's equivalent, even if they're not as good at boarding. So the Grey Knights are going to find themselves surrounded. They're boxed in. And then they as they move towards Terra, they're going to get a communication from the Phalanx. As the Imperial Fists are going, hi, what are you doing? Why is your entire battle fleet here, and why are you being escorted by literally the entire system's defensive fleets? And the Grey Knights then have a conundrum. They are let's say they move in beyond the orbit of Luna. Now, remember something critically important. In Battlefleet Gothic, the range of 60 centimeters is roughly the range between Earth and the Moon. Okay? Remember, space is big. Luna has a lot of stellar defenses. Earth has a lot of stellar defenses. It also has the Phalanx. It also has Battlefleet Solar in orbit around it. And, of course, the Imperial Fist fleet elements that are surrounding the Phalanx. I do not know where exactly the Phalanx is. I would assume nominally the Phalanx would be positioned over the Imperial Palace, as the most important place for it to be would be over the Imperial Palace to defend. The Grey Knights now, they can't go back unless they admit defeat, which they're not going to do. They can't maneuver because they are currently being escorted by the Imperial Navy, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and they're being monitored by the Space Marine, the Imperial Fist Space Marines. But they're at least close to Earth. They need to get within lower Earth orbit, which means they have to either find a way to convince the Imperial Fists to stand down and let them through. I want you all to think about the likelihood of that one. They need to convince the Imperial Navy to leave, which they're not going to do. Or they need to convince the Adeptus Mechanicus what they're doing is important. And once they are in upper orbit, which is to say they are within the gravity well of Earth, the High Lords are going to be saying, excuse me, we would like to know why you are here and what this demonic threat is. You may, of course, speak to the High Lord Inquisitor. He would be happy to maintain proper secrecy on this matter. And the Grey Knights, of course, they can't tell them what they're doing. The Terminus Decree is for only Mr. Caldor Draigo. Or whoever is currently in charge of the Grey Knights. So we have the Grey Knights now have a problem. They're boxed in, and they need to get to Earth. They need to get to Terra. They have to go and put the Emperor back on his seat. Basically, they have to put him back on the golden toilet bowl. They have to make a decision. they either have to admit that they are now technically traitors to the Emperor, which would get them killed, or they have to make a mad rush for the planet and find a weakness in the box that they're in and push their way through it. Now, as somebody who does play BFG a lot and recognizing that it is an abstraction, it is still safe to say that and I know I'm going to get a lot of Imperial Fist fans angry at me, the weakest link in this box is the Imperial Fist fleet and the Phalanx. One, the Phalanx has never been in a state of complete repair for a very, very, very long time. And two, Space Marine ships are not ostensibly warships, and the Grey Knight versions are superior. Battling against Segmentum Solar would get them immediately obliterated. The Nova Cannons would annihilate them. The long-range Lances would cut them to pieces. Same problem with the Questoris fleet of the Admech. Now, it may be smaller than Battlefleet Solar, but the amount of damage it would do before it was finally defeated would be insurmountable. So I would say that they would make a bum rush to the Phalanx and the Grey Knight fleet to destroy them or disable them, while then rushing towards the inner, the lower Earth orbit, in order for teleportariums, in order for the other teleportariums, planetary bombardments, all that stuff that they will need in order to breach the palace. Now, another thing that I thought about was, okay, well, when they're in upper orbit, they could send all of their stuff down in things like Storm Ravens or Thunderhawks. They could basically move their elements down without getting their fleets close. There are problems with this idea, okay? The most principal problem is, why are you sending down all of your armies from orbit? You said you were, yes, you're here to deal with a demonic incursion, but you're literally sending everything down to the planet. Even assuming that this works, and you know what, it's actually a fairly safe idea that they would make a bum rush for the planet by dumping as many things as they can. The problem is that there's an awful lot of anti-air defenses. It would be a very bad idea. There's also, they need to get as close to Terra as they can for this, because there are fighter elements. There are a lot of things defending Holy Terra, including carrier-based fighters, and I need to impress this upon everyone watching. Swift Death fighters are not just like one-man fighters. Swift Death fighters are larger than Marauder bombers and are covered with twin-linked las cannons. They are effectively they're the equivalent of World War II strato fortresses and super fortress bombers that are designed solely to shoot down other Voidcraft. Thunderhawks can defend themselves against them, but if there's more than one squad of Swift Deaths, Thunderhawks get shot down very easily by them. And this goes the same for smaller Storm Ravens. The Xiphos fighter doesn't really have a chance against the Swift Death. It just doesn't. It's too small. It doesn't have enough firepower. So, right now, the only thing that the Grey Knights can do is, because, I mean, if they tell, hey, we need to get our armies down on the planet, there's a demonic incursion. Well, Battlefleet Solar is going to say, that's great. That's a great statement. You can take your Thunderhawks and Storm Ravens and do that. We're not letting your ships within bombardment range of the planet, though. That would guarantee the Grey Knights losing. Without fleet elements in orbit, there is no way they're going to be breaching the palace gates. So the Grey Knights know they need to get in close to the planet, and they need to be able to teleport beyond the defenses of the palace. And we'll get onto the defenses of the palace later. But ultimately, the Grey Knights have to make a blitz. They're going to go after the Imperial Fists because, simply put, they would be the easiest thing to do. They're on the way. They're not fighting gravity to get there. And they are going to be ultimately the easiest thing for them to deal with because their ships are less likely going to shoot them out of the sky. If they're in a fur ball with a bunch of Imperial Fist ships, they're less likely to be shot by Nova cannons. However, they have to make the motion. They have to make the moment. They have to do the thing. They have to hit the engines, go all ahead full, and engage the Imperial Fists. That moment is where we have to consider just the losses that the Grey Knights will face the moment that they make their intent hostile. Okay? And that moment is going to be rather obvious the moment they hit all ahead full and start making a dash for the planet and are not explaining what they're doing. Okay? The first thing that's going to happen is all of the Imperial Navy ships that have range are going to open fire with long-range lances and Nova cannons. And hoo boy, there's going to be a lot of them. We have to consider how many ships are simply going to be destroyed or disabled in the first volley of fire. And we need to be as charitable as we can. Remember, 5 battle barges, maybe 20 strike cruisers, and a mess of escorts. Now, the escorts are going to probably suffer the least damage. They're small, hard to hit. Yeah, they can be susceptible to Nova Cannon strikes simply because of the area of effect. But broadly speaking, they're not really what the naval elements and the ad mech are going to be firing at. They're going to be firing at the cruisers and the barges. And barges are giant targets for Nova cannons. There's a reason why the Imperial Navy gets them. And we are going to make the safe assumption that of the 5 battle barges, okay, that are there, 2 will survive. And that's a safe assumption. You know, that's actually me being charitable. And these 2 battle barges, I'm going to initiate the second use of the Caldor Draigo, okay? Because these battle barges are going to survive somehow to get and board the phalanx, because that's their goal. They want to get to the phalanx and at least disable it. Okay? Now, when it comes to strike cruisers, the strike cruisers battling between the Imperial Fists and the Grey Knights, they have roughly the same combat characteristics, though the Imperial Fists actually have more options when it comes to what they can do with them. It's going to be a matter of a knockdown drag-out fight. Again, long-range precision weapons are firing from the Imperial Navy and are hitting the Grey Knight ships. Out of the 20 that are there, we are going to presume that of that group, out of 20, again, this is another Caldor Draigo moment, because if we were being reasonable, none of them would survive. We will assume that 5 Grey Knight strike cruisers survive to get through the lines of the Imperial Fists. All of the other ones are destroyed or disabled. And when it comes to the escort craft, they're going to be engaged with other escort craft because while they are fast, they are dealing with the Imperial Fists escort crafts, which are just as fast as theirs, the Imperial Navies, and the Adeptus Mechanicus. They are going to suffer mightily from this engagement. These smaller vessels are going to be dying rapidly as they move towards the planet. There's really no Caldor Draigo excuse. Most of them are going to be destroyed, either in the support of their larger ships or being taken out by other frigates and destroyers. Okay, but the Grey Knights fleet have managed to board the phalanx with 2 battle barges, and it is going to be they're going to be focused on disabling the ability of the phalanx to fire its weapons and hopefully kill all the Imperial Fists inside. Despite the fact that Grey Knights are very, very good at their job, the inferior Imperial Fists are no slouches. This is going to take time. A lot of it. So ultimately what I'm saying is the battle barges and the phalanx are now out of the fight. People can go and play those 40k games to see who wins. It's a great question. I'd love to see the outcome. We're now talking about lower Earth orbit. Right now, the Grey Knights have a problem. They need to get what's left of their fleet elements, okay, and what's left of their army elements to the Imperial Palace. I don't know if I have enough Caldor Draigos to make this possible. The Imperial Palace is loaded with anti-ship defenses. The entire planet is a giant anti-ship defense. There's guns everywhere. Landing things, dropping drop pods, landing Thunderhawks and Storm Ravens and Thunderhawk transporters is not something that they're going to get away with easily, okay? They're going to be shot at constantly by the best weapons in the entirety of the Imperium of Man. So I am going to now count 1 Caldor Draigo for 3 each of the Grey Knight strike cruisers that are only destroyed out of the 5 that remain. Okay? That leaves you 2. Yeah, and again, supremely charitable here. 2 strike cruisers to drop their troops, and I'm assuming they've packed these things to the gills as best they can, to drop what they have and attempt to teleport people into the throne room. Now, couple of problems. The Imperial Palace is protected by void shields. You cannot teleport through a void shield. Sorry, that's just not possible. That's an established piece of lore that's been there forever. The other problem is you have to now find a way to disable the void shields around the palace, and then get your troops inside the palace. So let's talk about the defenses of the exterior. Only, 3 or 4 major armies of the most elite Imperial Guard ever to exist. You have the ground elements of the Imperial Fists chapter. And you have, of course, the Adeptus Custodes, the good old 10,000, who are everywhere in this part of the area, more than willing to stop you, not to mention the Sisters of Silence. Now, the battle in front of the Imperial Gate is a nightmare for the Grey Knights. They need to have their battle bar, they need to be spending their time either disabling the defenses, the actual gunnery defenses of the local area, to prevent them from being shot down. And we mentioned 3 Grey Knight strike cruisers die on their way just getting to the palace from the orbital and from the low orbit defenses, and there are a lot of them. So let's give another Caldor Draigo to the Grey Knights and assume that in their death those strike cruisers were able to destroy the weapon systems that are firing at them. That leaves those 2 strike cruisers to sit there and orbitally bombard the palace's void shields, trying to overload them. I am telling you that this is probably not going to happen, okay? Those void shields are designed to suffer orbital bombardments far more severe than even a pair of Grey Knight strike cruisers. Now, if they had battle barges that were capable of being present and not currently dumping their people into the phalanx to try and prevent everything in orbit from being shot to shit, I would say that they would have a chance, but 2 strike cruisers almost certainly do not, even with magma bombs and all other elements. This is where things start to run into the first significant walls, right? After the attrition of battling their way through the Sol system, they don't have enough forces to crack the Imperial defenses, even if they get to the gates of the palace itself in the void shields. So for every step beyond this point, we need to add 1 more Caldor Draigo to the list. So the first problem that they have to deal with is removing the void shields. That's a problem. Okay? We have added another Caldor Draigo. Let's say one of the strike cruisers in a noble and valiant effort crash lands itself into the palace. Okay, you know what? That'll fucking do it. But it will, however, take away their one of their remaining orbital elements. Okay? The next thing is the ground forces that are currently down there have to deal now with a crashed ship. A lot of them are going to be damaged simply by the impact of a Imperial light cruiser smashing through orbit. The other strike cruiser now has the duty, now that the void shields are down, to teleport their paladins. I would assume it's a bunch of paladins that are miraculously the ones on this one boat, to the throne room. Now we have another major problem. Teleportation for the Imperium of Man is through the warp. Now, if the Emperor does not have a reflection in the warp, they don't know where to teleport to. There's no place to go. The Astronomicon is out. How do they know where to teleport to? How do they know where the Emperor is? They don't. It's somewhere in the swirling mass. They have to rely on their navigator to be able to properly target it, and there's no guarantee that they will. So let us assume, okay, that the Caldor Draigo event happens again, and they teleport their paladins into the throne room where the Emperor is. Now, we're kind of moving outside of Battlefleet Gothic right now, because basically the moment after this teleportation happens, the last strike cruiser is going to be shot to hell as fleet elements enter lower orbit and begin shooting it out of the sky. Because, again, there's just not enough Grey Knights to prevent this from happening. It's all really a mad bid for time. So we're moving outside of Battlefleet Gothic, and we're going to talk about what's laying in wait for them at the throne room. Now, they have bypassed, somehow, the Titan Legions, because the Titan Legions are sitting on the outside of the Eternity Gate. But what's inside the Eternity Gate are Custodes, are Sisters of Silence, and the Emperor himself. Giving endless. I'm going to give them another Caldor Draigo for this. Let's say that they have a full army, miraculously on this one surviving strike cruiser, of paladins, their best men. And they teleport down before the Emperor and his custodian guard. How many Caldor Draigos do I need to spend here to have the paladins last for longer than a minute? Remember, Sisters of Silence completely negate all psychic powers. Most of the power of the paladins is their psychic powers. One custodian is significantly better than a paladin. The custodians would we are assuming how many. This is the hard part. How many Caldor Draigos do we need to sacrifice to assume that somehow the Grey Knights manage to fight their way through the custodians and the Sisters of Silence to get to the Emperor? How many more Caldor Draigos, chat? I'm going to say 10 more Caldor Draigos are needed, okay? Before they get to the Emperor. And it's going to wipe out basically all of them. And then you have what's left before the living god, Emperor. And they're telling him to get back on the throne. There's not enough Caldor Draigos in the universe for the Emperor to look at them and say, okay, I'll do what you say. I will cede to your authority. Therein lies the biggest bullshit Caldor Draigo nonsense of all. Because there are not going to be a lot of paladins left, or Terminators, or whatever. And they're not going to be enough to make the Emperor say, okay, I'll do as you say. The ultimate problem is, once the Emperor ascends, everything that I just described is basically happening because he wants to watch it. It's the Emperor of Man. As a god, he could simply erase the Grey Knights from existence the moment he wants to. He can do whatever the hell he really pleases. The Emperor in his full might doesn't have anything to fear from a group of low-level psychers, by comparison, that make up the Grey Knights. Ultimately, it boils down to Matt Ward logic, which is, who's the most spiritual liege of the moment? And I don't know if even Matt Ward would be willing to admit that the Grey Knights and Caldor Draigo are more of a spiritual liege than the Emperor himself. Now, Games Workshop has been doing an awful lot recently to try and make the Emperor not the Emperor. Arch Warhammer actually recently made a statement of, they're trying to make the Emperor evil. I'm actually going to produce a counterpoint. No, they're trying to make the Emperor incompetent. They're trying to make the Emperor not the actual Emperor. They want him to be a fool, a weakling, an incompetent loser. So when they finally make him the villain, which I do think they're trying to do, it is because the Emperor is merely an ingrate. Because do you seriously believe that they're going to bring back the Emperor himself and not have him fighting Robute Guilliman? So finally the Space Marine, Ultramarine fanboys who live at Games Workshop headquarters cannot finally say that that their spiritual liege of Robute Guilliman is in fact the spiritual liege of the Emperor himself. Come on, they're trying to do this. So ultimately, this is the ultimate flaw of the entirety of the plan. The Emperor ascends, there is not a damn thing the Grey Knights can do to stop him. The entire chapter does not have the psychic power to tell him no. They don't have the military might to tell him no. They don't have the fleet elements to tell him no. The Emperor himself can just say, destroy the Grey Knights. and the entirety of the Imperium of Man would wipe them out within 100 years. Which, to be honest, that's giving them a lot of credit. So that is my interpretation of the Terminus Decree, and the only rational thought process that I was able to come up with for even them to get close to getting their objective completed. Now, do I think that this is going to be written in any way like this? No, of course not. The writers are just going to say that the Grey Knights were conveniently on Terra, and they teleport to the throne room, and hooray, we win! Grey Knights forever! Matt Ward is our spiritual liege! But if we were actually taking some level of reasonable understanding of the writing and the lore of 40k, this is about as close as it would get, because they can't just teleport or warp to Earth. You can't do warp travel that close to a planet. They have to come from outside and go in. So that, my friends, is my video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all again in the next video. Have a great day.